Frederick Douglass was born Frederick Bailey in Maryland in either 1817 or 1818. His mother was an enslaved woman, and his father was a white man rumored to have been his mother's enslaver. He saw very little of his mother as a child because she lived on a different plantation 12 miles away. Douglass's mother died when he was only 7 years old, and he was raised by his grandmother. Family separation was one of the most horrific parts of enslavement, and it was not uncommon for enslaved children to be split apart from their parents, even at an early age.
Frederick Douglass was an American social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman. After escaping from slavery in Maryland, he became a national leader of the abolitionist movement in Massachusetts and New York, becoming famous for his oratory and incisive anti-slavery writings. Accordingly, he was described by abolitionists in his time as a living counterexample to slaveholders' arguments that slaves lacked the intellectual capacity to function as independent American citizens. As you can see, they were definitely proven wrong. Northerners at the time found it hard to believe that such a great orator had once been a slave. It was in response to this disbelief Douglass wrote 3 autobiographies describing his experiences as a slave in his narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. An American Slave, 1845, which became bestseller and was influential in promoting the cause of abolition, as was his second book, My Bondage and My Freedom, 1855. Following the Civil War, Douglass was inactive for the rights of freed slaves and wrote his last autobiography, Life and Times of Frederick Douglass, first published in 1881 and then revised in 1892, 3 years before his death. The book covers his life up to those dates. Douglass also actively supported women's suffrage, and he held several public offices. Without his permission, Douglass became the first African American nominated for Vice President of the United States as the running mate of Victoria Woodhull on the Equal Rights Party ticket. Douglass believed in a dialogue and in making alliances across racial and ideological divides, as well as in the liberal values of the United States Constitution, when radical abolitionists, under the motto "No Union with Slaveholders," criticized Douglass's willingness to engage in dialogue with slave owners. He replied, "I would unite with anybody to do right and with nobody to do wrong. My kind of man. That's my grandfather type." Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born into slavery on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay in Talbot County, Maryland. The plantation was between Hillsborough and Cordova. Douglass wrote in his autobiography that he had no recollection of his age due to not knowing when he was born, but Wikipedia estimates late 1817. However, based on the extant records of Douglass's former owner, Aaron Anthony, historian Dixon J. Preston determined that Douglass was born in February of 1818. With no pinpoint date, Douglass chose February 14th, 1818 to be his birthday, in memory of his mother, always calling him her little Valentine. After being separated from his mother at the age of 6, Douglass was given to the Auld family, where Sophia Auld would start to teach young Frederick Douglass, now 12, the alphabet because she believed literate slaves made happier slaves. This was Douglass' first lesson, and he continued to practice until one day Sophia noticed Douglass's hunger to learn and caught him reading the newspaper and snatched it from him because it went against the law of the land at that time. She stopped teaching Douglass and hid all potential literature, including the Bible, from Douglass. But that didn't stop Mr. Douglass from teaching himself at every opportunity, from other kids in the neighborhood to all the men who would leave books, papers all around in parks and all around the workplace in Baltimore. On September 3rd, 1838, Douglass successfully escaped by boarding a northbound train of the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad. Douglass reached Havre de Grace, Maryland, in Hartford County, in the northeast corner of the state near Chesapeake Bay. There he reunited with the love of his life, a free black woman named Anna Murray, who provided the plan and a sailor's uniform and half of her savings to purchase the train ticket all the way to Baltimore. Wow, that's really love. To bet on Douglass like that in that time. Let's continue. Editor, roll clips and give us more information on Frederick Douglass. Fair use.
When Douglass was a child, the wife of one of his enslavers, Sophia Auld, began teaching him the alphabet and a few short words. This began to open up the world to young Frederick, whose blooming literacy allowed him to see the world in a new way. But soon, Sophia's husband, Hugh, put a stop to these lessons by telling his wife that, quote, if you teach him how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. But Douglas did learn to read, and he later went on to hold secret meetings to teach other enslaved people how to read as well. In Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, the first of his 3 memoirs, Douglas discussed a man named Edward Covey. Covey was what was known as a slave breaker, known for breaking unruly enslaved people who presented problems to the planters. And Covey was notoriously ruthless. In early 1833, Douglas was rented out to Covey and for months was subjected to unrelenting abuse. On September 15, 1838, Douglas married a free black woman named Anna Murray. We know Frederick Douglass to be one of the most famous and influential figures in American history. But the lesser-known Anna played an important role in helping Douglas escape to freedom in the first place, and also took on the burden of financially supporting their family before Douglas's career as an orator paid the bills. Douglas had already desperately wanted freedom, but meeting and falling in love with a woman who herself was free only reaffirmed that desire. He borrowed papers and a sailor's uniform for a disguise. His journey required him to hop on a moving train, avoid anyone who may have recognized him, and take a detour by ferry, all to get him from Baltimore to New York within a day. Douglas later wrote of arriving in New York City, quote, "A new world had opened upon me. If life is more than breath and the quick round of blood, I lived more in one day than in a year of my slave life." After the war, Douglas continued to travel, making speeches, writing essays, and revising his earlier books. Douglas served multiple political appointments in the post-war years, including president of the Freedmen's Savings Bank, United States Marshal for the District of Columbia, and minister resident and consul general to the Republic of Haiti. He also started a new newspaper, the New National Era. My man stayed busy. There's so much to say about Frederick Douglass and not nearly enough time. I will say that if you haven't spent much time with his writing, you absolutely should.
All about what it protects. Now, some people may wonder about the final box, the ammunition box, or the cartridge box, whether or not it's necessary anymore. And of course, I think our founding fathers understood that the right to keep and bear arms is an essential component to being a full-blown citizen. It is an essential component to function as a last resort to resisting tyranny and ensuring human freedom and liberty. That's why the Founding Fathers specifically included the text of the Second Amendment in the Constitution to permanently protect the right for all Americans. Frederick Douglass in the 19th century certainly understood this too when he said that without the cartridge box and the other boxes, no class of people could live and flourish in this country.
Hey guys, it's Jose, your regular Joe Blow again, keeping an eye out and my ears open to Frederick Douglass. Full salute and thank you, sir, for your integrity, for your stand-up character, tenacity, and perseverance to excel and prevail. It's remarkable, and I will continue to lead by example. Guys, do your research, and if you still didn't get much from Mr. Douglass, check this quote out that he said and lived by. Quote, that to God, protect and maintain his liberty. The freedom should have the ballot. The liberties and the American people were dependent upon the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. That without these, no class of people could live and flourish in this county. End of quote. Thank you guys always for the support so I can continue to bring you my best to bring you the best. Stay free.